everyone. My name is Damir Pozderac. I'm a film festival director. And tonight we officially opened the 16th annual Bosnian-Herzegovinian Film Festival in New York City here. I would like to thank you for being with us here tonight. BHFF is a community project, 16 years in the making, and run by and organized by volunteers from Bosnian, Balkan regional, and other local New York City communities. So first and foremost, I would like to thank our supporters, Trust for Mutual Understanding, New York State Council on the Arts, New York City Department of Cultural Affairs and Film Fund Sarajevo, our partners, Association of Filmmakers in Bosnia-Herzegovina, the Academy of Fine Arts in Sarajevo, then our corporate sponsors, board of patrons, and private donors. We thank our filmmaker guests here for being with us here today and for making a trip to New York and for visiting us. Every year, people ask us, why do we have so many films about war? And every year, we answered that question in two parts. First, Bosnia is a fairly small country and produces relatively few films each year, so choices about what should be made or what shouldn't be made are usually very carefully thought out. And the second part of that is the films produced in Bosnia represent the stories that public still finds very relevant. Film directors in Bosnia, like any artists, observe the society around them and they naturally respond and interpret the need and interest of the people. So for many years, and yet still, that need has been to address the subject and legacy of the Bosnian and Balkan wars of the 90s. Now, with that being said, what is special this year is that we have a great number of mostly and relatively young and emerging filmmakers, a few maybe a little older than the others, but they're carrying the core of the festival program. We are seeing a millennial and post-war generation of Bosnian and other filmmakers coming to the front, giving the festival a fresh perspective and a new breath. With their authentic and diverse cinematic styles, we have a festival this year that has a rich artistic quality with art supporting the stories. As a festival with a tradition of supporting both established and emerging filmmakers, female filmmakers, as well as addressing relevant and contemporary social issues, this year's festival will particularly stand out on subjects of family, generational transitions, and artistic expression. And with that, what you will see is also a shift in subject matter. This year, you will see stories that bridge the generational divide and show what it means to be a parent, what it means to be a dedicated and supporting father, a struggling mother with an autistic child, or a wife of an abusive husband. This year's program will show the struggles beyond the legacy of war. And it all starts tonight, and it all starts with the very first film of the BHFF 2019. Damir Avdagic response and reprise celebrates the power of words and the courage to speak up about the things that our parents taught us to be quiet about. We will also have two more short films to follow. Nedim Karalic short and sharp film Luck, and a smart cinematic treat from the former BHFF Golden Apple winner Slobodan Maksimovic, The Invisible Hand of Adam Smith. So all three films have been nominated for the Audience Award for the Best Picture, and you should have gotten the slips to vote, so please cast the votes at the end of that. And that's just the start. So we invite you to come back this week, later, in the next few days, and see what makes this BHFF the special one. Enjoy the film, stick around for a Q&A, and welcome to BHFF 2019.
Ja sam Erol Avdović, rođen sam 1958. godine u Skopju, u Makedoniji. Otac i majka su mi Bošnjaci ili Bosanci. I čitaču Damira A, koji je rođen 1987. godine u Banja Luci u Bosni i Hercegovini.
Subconsciously, because my mom and dad have always been like, čuvaj se, čuvaj se, čuvaj se, and all that. So I feel like I'm a very anxiety driven.
Ali ja isto mislim, izvini što sam ti upao ovdje, ali mislim da ovi mladi ljudi govore o nečemu čega mi nismo bili sposobni. Mi smo učeni da je šutnja zlato. A ovi govore da hoće da jednom bar zauvijek naprave korak dalje i da razgovaraju i da racionaliziraju stvari. Dok je vruće, što bi se reklo.
Tako da sve starije generacije iz naše kulture koji kažu ćuti, nećemo da pričamo o tome, to je bila samo zaštita, psihološka zaštita. Bolje da ne znaš.
Damire, ja sam primijetila nešto o tebi. Ti voliš provocirati ljude.
Nemoj pričati o tome. I da, let me break the fourth wall again. Recimo, većina naše generacije i prije rata nije željela govoriti o ratu i o mogućnosti rata i o mogućnosti da se institucije raspadnu. Zato što je politika nešto čime se trebaju baviti ljudi koji su bogati, moćniji od nas. Mi tome nismo dostojni, nismo ravni, mi moramo šutjeti i bolje da se jer bi mogli najebati. Mentalitet straha koji je zapravo postojao i prije rata. On nije nastao zbog rata i nakon rata, nego je rat nastao zbog njega.
Good evening and welcome back. My name is Amir Husak, and together with Diana Jelacha, my colleague, I'm one of the programmers of this year's festival. I want to welcome you all. Our director has done that before the screening, and I'm excited that we have tonight with us the director of the first film that you've seen, Reprise Response, Damir Avdagić, and the two of the protagonists, so to say, from this film, Erol Avdović and Ivo Škorić. I believe he's here too. And I would just use this opportunity to invite them over to the stage so we can start our Q&A. Please give them a hand. First, thank you for this film and welcome. So great to have you join us tonight. I'm going to start with a bit of official biographies, I guess, to introduce you to the audience, and so we found out a little bit about you, but I'm going to start with Ivo Škorić, who's right next to me. Yes. As a student in Zagreb, then Yugoslavia, in 1984, Ivo Škorić started working for the renowned Radio 101. That engagement, as we heard in a film, didn't last very long, as he was fired because of his political views challenged those of the government. He continued writing, and his texts were featured in nearly all important youth and progressive publications of the time, such as Polit, Studentski list, Mladina, Stav, Focus, and others. His texts tackled social, ecological, and human rights issues. And since 1990, he lives in the US, where he continued to be active as editor for the radio program Croatian Monitor and a number of web-based projects such as Yugo Anti-War, Sarajevo Pipeline, and Balkan Pages. Welcome, Ivo.
Welcome. Thank you.
Next to Ivo, we have Erol Avdović, another protagonist of this film, so to say. He's an award-winning journalist from Sarajevo, based in New York now. Since 1993, he's covering the UN, US, and global affairs for many prominent West Balkan media, including Deutsche Welle. He was a UN and US bureau chief for Jutarnji List and Vjesnik, Croatian dailies, and currently a columnist and commentator for Dnevni Avac from Sarajevo, the biggest regional daily newspaper. Mr. Avdović is also managing editor of Web Publica Press, a global foreign affairs web portal, and a regular contributor to TV and other multimedia outlets. Avdović is an author of 2 books, including Dayton Submarine, Chronicle on the Dayton Peace Accords, 1995. He was 2 times president of the United Nations Correspondents Association, and for many years a member of its board of directors. Welcome, Erol.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
And finally, last but not least, we have the director of Reprise Response, Damir Avdagić. Damir Avdagić is an interdisciplinary artist, currently living and working between Oslo, Norway, and New York, US. Damir's artistic practice is based in performance, text, and video, and deals with issues of memory and identity. The historical background of Avdagic's work, as we could see, is the conflict in former Yugoslavia, which lasted from 1991 till 1995, and from which his family fled to Norway in 1993. Avdagić has produced a number of video works, which are usually shown in gallery settings, not very often at film festivals, if that's correct, right? Including Prevođenje, translation from 2014, and Reenactment Process from 2016. So, I would like to start by asking, how do you know each other, and how did this collaboration come about? I know you're in Norway, you've also lived in the States. Ivo and Erol are based here. How did this all start? How did you meet each other?
How did you find us?
That's interesting.
It was actually pretty hard. When this piece was shot, I was doing an artist residency in New York. Prior to that, I had lived in Los Angeles, where I went to school. So the piece that I made was made during that year when I was in residency. And it was finding the participants for the work was pretty much through the grapevine, really. I found them like through there was an acquaintance of an acquaintance of an acquaintance of an acquaintance that pointed me to each of the participants. And, you know, I had also posted calls on various websites and put up ads different places, and I met with a lot of people too, but there weren't that many people interested. So it was very, I mean, what the younger generation was talking about in the previous film, this silence and the fear, that was very much present in my interaction with people when I was looking for participants. So it took me about 5 months to actually get a group together.
Including Sanja and Zoran as well.
Yes.
Erol and Ivo, where were you like, this guy talks about things that we don't want to talk about? Was that a response?
No, but it was pretty easy for me actually to accept, because it was first time somebody offered me, after many years in journalism and being on the TV and radio, etc. So it was a new media challenge for me, so I immediately accepted somehow because of my curiosity. That's basically part of my nature and character, and I indeed accepted. Then I also read about Damir that he is the young director with the Scandinavian sensibility. So since me and my friend are New Yorkers with that adrenaline drive all the time, so I said, obviously we are going to have a nice and calm talk, which actually didn't happen. But I really want to congratulate to Damir because we were talking about a couple of hours and we were shooting in Brooklyn on May 9th, you told me. And somehow it was a pretty difficult part of my life because my mother was sick and she passed away in a couple of weeks. And I'm really amazed how you assembled all of that and what kind of product came out of it. So, congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I know Erol for many years because we are writing for same newspapers. I think I actually wrote for one of your publications here in
Europress and Eurobazaar.
Exactly. So we know each
My sons knows that very well because they were involved in that production.
Yeah. So and Damir reached to Adnan from Bosnian television, BHFF New York, and Adnan reached to me, and this clicked together because of the stuff that we used to do 10 years ago. We had a non-profit organization, Raccoon. I don't know how many of you are familiar, but that was a non-profit in Queens that worked with people from former Yugoslavia who came here as refugees and offered cultural programs and psychological counseling and helping find a lawyer and a doctor and translations. And we have really big programs at that time. So this was similar, you know. We were dealing with people's memories at that time, you know, when it was fresh, and this was like a rehash 10, 15, 20 years later from the mouth of the new generation who was born in families like ours. My son is right here now, and he's one of that generation. So it was definitely something that I wanted to participate. So this is how I got into it.
Thank you. And now that you pointed out that your children are here, I do want to ask you something specifically about these conversations a bit later, but I want to go back to Damir briefly and talk a little bit about this concept. After watching your film, I think for the second or third time, and now even, before one's historical experience becomes an actual narrative, it usually has to pass different kinds of filters, which can often be very political, ideological, even mythological, before they really, before these twists kind of come together into one story. I thought that your film, besides like opening the conversation in a certain sense, also tries to avoid or tries to also make visible actually these filters that exist. Can you speak a little bit about this concept? Did this really emerge out of your conversations maybe with your parents? Is this how these ideas came about?
Can you, when you say filters, what can you explain a little bit more what you mean?
So before, I'm thinking more about specific kind of one's historical kind of experience. Can be even collective, or before it actually turns into a narrative, before we can actually put it into something.
Right.
It's a story, right?
Well, I mean, the way my method of working is based in talking to people. Also, before I actually shoot a project, I collect material, and all of that material is spoken material from people who were there during the conflict or who fled during the conflict, and the material is also gathered across generations. So the younger ones, the older ones. I also sometimes use historical documents, but I mean, what I try to do is I try to listen for things that repeat in the different narratives. And also in the last piece that I made, which was also, one part of it was also a conversation amongst four younger members, four younger people, four members of my generation. And the thing that, this was also an unprompted conversation. I wasn't interviewing them, but they were also reading something and then reflecting on it or reacting to it. And editing that material, reading through it time after time after time, the one thing that the group kept returning to was the question about the parents. So in that way, I try to like look for or listen for historic symptoms. And I like to say, like things that are based in the past, but something that subjects continue to carry on into the present. So in terms of in terms of like, yes, there's like a collective experience that I've tried to sort of look at.
And it's what's interesting is really that we kind of, I think a lot of us really share that. And I had it also, watching it, it was also, well, I know it was in my family too. In a sense, avoid the conversation because it's going to bring you into a conflict. And it's a sense, it's an attempt to avoid conflict or avoid some kind of a harm, right, in many ways. But then I'm wondering really now that you also pointed out that your children are here, who shies away more from these conversations? Is it you or is it the kids? And they can also chime in, I guess.
To answer to your question, indeed, I don't have a shying problems with the kids. They know that my favorite expression is there is no mystery, nema misterije. We obviously talk to the point where we agree to what Americans are saying, common sense, and also bringing our Balkan experiences. One of my son famously said, my dad, you may escaped from Balkans, but Balkans didn't escape from you, and I have to confess that I preserve that as a healthy dimension of my existence here in America. So I think there was no shy, there was open dialogue, and it was reflected in that well-researched and well-analyzed film.
Well, yeah, I mean, we who came here already as an adults in our 20s, we are always going to remain hyphenated. You know, our existence is going to remain hyphenated. And some of us would shy, but I'm not obviously a person that's very shy. It's probably pretty obvious from what you saw so far. So I don't shy from conversations like that. And my wife is also coming from the journalistic and activist background. She was a Women in Black in Belgrade. She's from Podgorica, so she also doesn't shy. Our son, well, he is not shy, I wouldn't say that, but he's bored with that conversation. It's not really something that is very important and pressing to him as a high school student in New York City really to engage into. But because he's a history buff now, he likes to hear about everything that's happening, and we are completely open with him. Coming from the two different backgrounds, I went to University of Zagreb, she went to University of Belgrade, so we grew up in two different places that were soon going to be in war, and we were exposed to different propagandas in the late 80s, because the media already kind of started behaving completely different in Zagreb and Belgrade after 1985. So we heard both sides, and I think we are a good resource to our son about that.
It took full 10 minutes before the Bosnian cracked a joke in the film. And I had to...
It was spontaneous, go on.
But then I started thinking about, and this question for all of you, about the importance of humor in one way as a coping mechanism, because we're also talking about trauma, but also not as just a coping mechanism, but a way actually to make these conversations more possible or more palatable, if you will. Can you speak a little bit about that, and how often does that emerge actually for all of you? How often does the humor emerge actually as something, as kind of a vehicle, so to say, to talk about this, or something that assists us in these conversations, making them more possible?
Well, and there was even more humor in the footage than what I included, and for me, I mean, it was very important for it to be there because, I mean, at the outset, it seemed like such an impossible project to do, and at several points I thought, I'm just going to give this up. I mean, no one wants to be part of this. But then when everyone got together and we started shooting, and granted, like, the humor and the warmth didn't happen until maybe the third hour. But then
we had a lunch before.
Yes, you had a lunch before.
It always kind of helps, yeah, with opening up.
And director paid for that.
But I thought including that material was so important because it was at such odds with the initial impossibility that I experienced with making the project. You have the traumatic aspect and the historical aspect, but you also had the humor and the warmth, and that to me was very indicative of, oh, we did it, you know, it's possible. And also, like, so much of all the work that I do is this collective reconciliation or this collective engagement in a talking cure, and yeah, those parts really were important because of that.
I also find it that for me, I think, especially after the war, going back actually and visiting Bosnia, that often these conversations were possible only in situations when someone could actually bring in the humor, and usually it was someone who really experienced these things directly and had a very specific way of actually talking about it. Could you, Erol and Ivo, maybe reflect on this, also on the importance of humor and the presence of humor in these kinds of conversations?
As I said, we were dressed in black, so obviously we approach to this request of the director very seriously, in serious mood, even with that kind of not imitating but bearing our trauma on our shoulders. Everybody of us has its own experience, although we were here, but we were in that conflict that Ivo said. And Ivo also knows as a journalist how difficult it is to open somebody that you are interviewing or talking. It was really interesting also for the viewers that Damir actually didn't ask us a question. He only gave us the talk that was make a transcript of the younger generation, obviously with all the gap between generations. But gap of the generation is not, as we all know, it's not only the age gap, it's educational gap, it's technology gap, it's countries, between countries gap. So we have that and share that experience. And then, since it was somehow difficult actually to address your expectation, etc., so I found it like every single Bosnian actually do, just spontaneously act and react with humor. I'm not aware of that, obviously, but it worked. I saw that it worked. Absolutely. I didn't know. Obviously, it was a very interesting part of the film, and I'm glad of that. But I believe it's not because the situation was humorous, not at all.
No.
The situation, on contrary, was very serious. That's why, because probably I was with a kind of positive tremor and everything, so I reacted like I usually react, like make a joke.
Ivo, I thought what was interesting in the film for me is the way you also perform the script, where you emphasize something, where it's like, don't talk about it, don't talk about it, don't talk about it. And I thought that was really, this emphasis was so important also in translating this, in a sense.
Oh, the emphasis is only because when I read it, I was like, oh my God, but this is what I'm listening all my life, including from my wife, you know. So, and from my son, you see, even my son is like, oh, don't say that now. You don't do that now. And, you know, be careful, you know. So I'm always cracking jokes and telling things that not maybe everybody wants to hear. So, but that's me, and I might be exception. But what it is interesting is that our culture, particularly the Bosnian part of our Western Balkans culture, always had that humor incorporated fantastically. You know, like when I was growing up in the 80s, we all looked to Sarajevo for Top lista nadrealista and for Zabranjeno pušenje, and this was where most of the jokes where our daily show happened. Our Jon Stewart was there, you know, and things really were happening in Bosnia then, in the 80s, right before everything fell apart. I think this was probably one of the most free times in time and in any country at that point, you know, right before the war. As the superstructure of the oppressive regime was falling apart slowly, and they were not really able to suppress all the little youth uprisings around them. This was really a wonderful and free time, and then it ended very badly. Yeah, but the humor was present there through centuries. It is kind of like black culture in the United States. If you look now at the number of comedians, you know, the Dave Chappelle and Trevor Noah and you know, who is really the most funny in this country. That's the same with Bosnia in terms of long years of always hearing the bad news. And everybody is tired of always hearing the bad news, and the only way to cope with it is to find the way to find humor in them and to make fun of bad news. And that helps the civilization survive under the oppression of everyday stressors. And Bosnia was like for millennia really under everyday stressors. I mean, when was the last time Bosnia was in the normal situation. It was either under Ottomans or under Austrians or under one regime, under the other regime, or in the war. It's always something. It was never really normal. So and that transpires to the culture, and that brings this black humor that we all grew up with and that we all love.
And if I may, it only became normal, and it's only normal if you're Bosnian, and especially if you're from Sarajevo, that you cannot be serious if you're not a bit funny.
We're also good. I'm from Krajina. You're from Krajina as well, I believe, right? You're from Banja Luka.
Banja Luka.
Just have to, we always have this a little bit, the battles between Sarajevo and this is a local thing. Now, I have another question, but I want to open it up to the audience and give you an opportunity to ask our guests. Question here. Can we have the mic, please?
I'm very curious. First, I enjoyed the movie because I like the way you presented information in a unique way. And, I know there was reading material, and then it seemed everyone was breaking out spontaneously. So I'm very curious how many hours did you shoot? And I'm also curious if you could sort of give us an idea of the momentum of what happened. Like, did you wind up snipping little pieces from many times, or did a momentum build and the majority of the film came from some moment when everybody started to rise up together and get more exciting?
The shoot was about 5 hours, I would say, around 5 hours. So there was a lot of material, and all of the material is also spoken material. So it's just 5 hours of people talking. I would say maybe 80% of everything that I used came at around the same time. It's not. I haven't used like I have cut it. It is edited, but most of it is used from like the last maybe hour and a half from the shoot, and the beginning. Also, it starts where we started, and then a lot of the material is taken from the later half.
I suspected that was the case, and I give you credit for going 5 hours and having the patience to let things evolve. That's a great way to work. Very nice job.
Thank you.
Indeed, I also think so. It's a great piece of work, especially because now I know that you use that artistic crescendo that has happened, like really at the very moment. So congratulations for listening to us 5 hours, probably many times. I wouldn't afford that.
It took around 5 months to have the edit done, and it was a lot of editing and re-editing. Yeah.
Well, it came out interesting, and obviously 5 hours would be boring to watch, but I didn't know how you are going to do it and what are you going to do it, but you got it out nicely, and now that I know that you actually did it only the last part, that's interesting. So you were kind of waiting till we become funny?
Well, no, I wasn't waiting, but I think
it took too much. I mean, more than 3 hours.
I think it had a lot to do with the comfort level.
Okay, sure.
I think all the participants started getting more honest about their feelings.
You think we were not honest at the very beginning?
No, you were honest, but you were a little careful, maybe.
Yeah. It was really about the comfort level. We were all getting uncomfortable in our seats after sitting there for 4 hours. So we said, like, let's give him something, that he can really use. So,
get out of here.
Any other questions from the audience? It's not on.
No, now is it not on?
It sounds not.
Yeah. Hello?
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, I actually have a question. It's short, so it was like 20-25 minutes, and your video was of the older generation. So I'd love to know like the thought process on the length, as well as using the talk in the video from the older generation to describe the younger generation, and just how you came to the conclusion of the final film.
Yeah, so maybe I can say a little bit more about, in general, the way I work from piece to piece, because what I do, I describe it as a project-based practice, and it's a longer investigation. So I make large projects about one theme. And I always find that completing one work leaves some things unanswered, or it poses new questions. The beginning for making this work was because my generation was so preoccupied with the parents' generation. So that seemed like a natural way to continue. And in terms of the length of the film, I usually show in gallery settings and museum settings, which is very different from this type of setting, because you don't have comfortable seating, you're not in a dark room, you're usually on a hard bench. So I always try to keep my video work at around 20 to 25 minutes, just because I know the attention span of a viewer in that space is difficult to work with. Was there another? Wasn't there more? Yeah.
I'm having a hard time with this. That was it. That was it. I thought it was great.
You are loud enough to we hear you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Take a few more. There's one up there.
So it's very interesting to hear the older generation talk about how the younger generation is viewing these issues that came up. But it seems to me the best bang for the buck is to get the younger generation to again talk about it across the region. Is there some aspect of this film or something you have in mind to continue the conversation among the younger generation, so you can have different participants talking about what happened and what's happening now?
Well, that in a way is what I'm doing when these two pieces are exhibited together, because this piece and my last piece were installed in the same space in a museum in Norway in September. And then you have that direct spatial connection where they talk to each other across time and across space. In terms of working with youth in the region, I'm not sure if because I see this from someone who fled the conflict, and I also only work with people who fled the conflict, who are part of that diaspora. And that's also what I'm interested in.
You should make a Discord server for people. Most of the young people are socializing in the chat rooms. Mm-hmm. So,
yes,
and I'm aware that my son has friends from former Yugoslavia on Discord that they also talk to each other about the historical stuff.
I hope to show the work in the region for that purpose.
I also think, if I may add, that I'm not sure, Damir, if you had a kind of scenario that our generation, we can not call ourselves baby boomers, but we are obviously that Y generation or Z, whatever, that nomenclature. X.
We are between X and baby boomers.
Okay. That young generation wouldn't even be interesting in commenting on what we are talking. We were more interesting in a way because we were of those who are giving advices or think that we are somebody who is giving an advice. So, but this is a great idea actually, to have a younger generation in that discourse to talk about these issues.
So like my son in his history class in his high school right now, they are starting the World War I, 1914. We all know where it started. So the discussion touches Bosnia, and the teacher knows that my son is from former Yugoslavia. So Okay, Tin, tell us. So I'm telling them what you told me. So it's like he asked him, so what's the Bosnia special? And he says, well, they have 3 presidents. And that's one thing that they know, that the country is really different than the other countries in many respects. As the media used to say in the 90s, a very interesting country. You know, and then we all know the curse in Bosnia, may you live in the interesting country.
The best country for living is obviously a boring country, like Scandinavian countries.
Yes. Like a boring Denmark, you know, I mean, or Iceland, you know, very boring.
If I was just thinking about something from the film again, and somebody says, I think it was Erol, it was you, saying like, talking about this while it's warm, talking about these things while they're warm. And memory is notoriously unreliable. Things kind of just fade away or change in a sense. And I was just curious, because both of you have been writing about these things as well in different media. When you look back at some of the writings you were doing before, and specifically with your position now and how things kind of developed, what has really changed for you specifically on the memory of these events?
Some things has been changed, obviously, because of the technology, of the passing of the time, of our experience, of fading of our memories. That is the best part of everything. Since can you imagine if your brain has to be storage for all these kind of stuff that you had to write or so. And other things are almost the same, because I'm sure Ivo as well and me, we were basing, I based my journalism on the kind of evidence-based journalism. It's like, again, boring but evidence-based medicine. So you are not talking too much to the patient, but you are talking to the facts. So obviously after a while we were corresponding, talking with the facts, including and fact-checking and everything. So everything is like kind of archive that is somewhere. I always, very often actually found myself asking my question, if I knew what I had to report, although I was reporting from the United States and from New York with at the Security Council, where 70 resolutions on Bosnia were adopted and no single one was implemented. And my family knows that I indeed had episodes of nerve kind of breaking my nerves and everything. So I'm asking myself whether I would do it again. Probably, honestly, I wouldn't. Whether I could have escaped from my destiny, if I sort to believe in that, and I do believe, I don't know, but I will have a second thoughts whether I should do it again.
But you were younger then, it was easier for
Probably.
you to, you know, I mean, it's so hard now. But yes, it is, I'm mostly, now that I'm, like I used to write about what's happening there for people here, now I'm writing about what's happening here for people in Croatia, like in various newspapers and stuff. And I'm always thinking, like, can you imagine having a country, like you have Bosnia, that US had a situation where it has Trump, Hillary, and Bernie as presidents. All of them together, you know, in White House, you know, like in Bosnia, you know. How would that work? I mean, who knows? Maybe it would be really, really interesting here, you know.
Should we then in Bosnia adopt the electoral college or
with the veto power?
Like we already have, you know, I mean, we definitely need one more layer of government in Bosnia. We don't have enough.
We only have 70.
Yeah, we only have cantons, and then we have federation, and
10 cantons.
and then we have
Hundreds of
entities, and then so we also can invent an electoral college to add more politicians, because that is definitely not enough for Bosnia.
I think that's all the time we had. We kind of end on a, I guess, funny note again, or a sarcastic note, should I say. Thank you, Damir. Thank you, Erol. And
Thank you.
Thanks, Ivo. Thank you for being here.